And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm, and thank you so much for joining us for our unique podcast community where we explore the triumphs and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. And thank you so much for helping us grow. We hit 1,875 subscribers today. We grow every day thanks to people like you. Please remember to hit that subscribe button and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. We love it when you like and share our videos as it once again helps us grow. And we have so many interesting guests on the show. This is our 275th episode, and we've had stars of the Metropolitan Opera, members of Broadway. We've had African drummers. We've had artists of every variety on the show, and that's why I love to talk to great people and to find out more about the art that we all love so much. To see our over past 275 views, our shows, go on our website at www.jasontram.net. Again, that's www.jasontram with two M's.net. We have a wonderful guest today. We have Artemisia LeFay, who is a dynamic singer, also a dancer and performer, and an interesting, she has a cool concept going and it has so many different things happening. Welcome, Artemisia.
Thank you.
First of all, that is a gorgeous name. Tell us about your name.
Thank you. Yes. So it's not my birth name. It's a name that is both a stage name and something that I'm going to legally change it to. There was a bit of trial and error with my birth name because it's quite masculine, and that was confusing in auditions for people. But Artemisia LeFay has been my my public name for, I want to say, 7 years now. And actually, the day that I chose it, I was reading a box of absinthe-flavored pastilles from Italy. And of course, one of the prime ingredients of absinthe is wormwood, Artemisia absinthium. So when I saw it, I immediately thought, damn, that needs to be my stage name. So I adopted it, and it's got several interesting meanings. There was a Turkish warrior queen by the name of that.
Cool.
Near the fall of an empire, there was a female Renaissance painter in Italy by the name of Artemisia Gentileschi. You know what I'm talking about. And yeah, it's a botanical name as well. So people seem to like saying it and announcing it, which is good for my publicity.
I love it. From absinthe to the stage. It really makes sense, and it's really very catchy and a very cool name. Now, tell us about your training as an artist. What did you dance and you sing really well? So how did you do both? It's rare to do both so well.
Yes. So I attribute a lot of my freedom to explore and train who I was as an artist to homeschooling. I was homeschooled throughout middle and high school. And my parents are both classical musicians, so there was a lot of emphasis on the performing arts. At one point, my parents traveling around to perform and get gigs. That was chaotic on my brother and I as kids trying to go to public school. So homeschooling we did. We were able to hook up with the Westchester, New York City homeschooling communities, which involved a lot of emphasis on studying performing arts and community theater. So I was able to get education in stage combat, in Shakespeare, in musical theater, and acting, and improv. I'm not sure if I said improv already. But along with that, one of my greatest passions in life is classical singing. So with homeschooling, I was able to focus on having that sort of studio education. And once I left what would have been the equivalent of high school, college didn't work out very well for me. It's a long story involving 4 different colleges within probably the span of 2 years, and a lot of kids around me doing drugs. So I decided that just going straight into the performing arts, learning on the fly, and continuing with studio education would be best for me.
Having parents in the business, certainly you know the ropes, and you being right outside New York City, you have access to so much interesting performing arts, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we certainly met on a production that just closed on a couple days ago. The Teatro Graticello's magnificent production of Zandenoi's Giulietta e Romeo. And it was great to kind of meet you and to see you working, and what a neat production that was.
Very beautifully done. So I still have the music stuck in my head. It's
Giulietta mia.
yes, that tenor aria in the third act. Yeah, he was such a star. But one thing that I really loved about the production was the sort of the movement direction, and how it all went together with the shapes and the concept of the set. Stephanos, um, I remember him saying that he was inspired by German Expressionism, which is also a very big inspiration for me. The silent films, the art, the philosophies, the poetry, the whole movement behind that. I'm an enormous fan of. Mhm.
So tell us about the Ghosts of Weimar, and we'll transition to that. That's a great transition point. So
Thank you.
when did you come up with this concept, and tell us what that is?
Yes, so Ghosts of Weimar Past. It has been it's my baby. It's been my baby for the past, let me think. For the past 3 years. It's gone through a lot of different changes, and it started out, I was hired by a steampunk convention. It was the Cogs Expo, to do some sort of cabaret show. And in its very first incarnation, it was just me on stage, and some crazy homemade outfits, and a cell phone piano tracks. And I sang a bunch of songs from the 1920s and 30s in German, French, and English. And
what attracted you to that repertoire?
The repertoire, oh gosh. I'm going to say it's a combination of the 1970s film Cabaret with Liza Minnelli, of course, and discovering the music of Ute Lempe, who is a contemporary German cabaret singer who's also dubbed a lot of Disney princesses in the German translations of the Disney movies. And that sort of led me down a rabbit hole of discovering music, which in itself often involved me begging the living family members of the composers back then for sheet music, and they very generously obliged. So I've, over the years, amassed quite a library of hard to find Weimarian cabaret. And the music, and I started researching the literature, I started researching the history, the significant figures, the poetry. Anita Berber, the expressionist dancer, and as she was called back then, the high priestess of depravity, have all been very big inspirations for me. Actually, the artwork, the promotional artwork, is done by a dear friend of mine, Bryce Edwards, and is inspired by German expressionistic films. And in some versions of the show, you can find some recitations of German expressionistic poetry, accompanied by Beethoven, Tchaikovsky. So there's a lot of research into it, and just the more I research, the more I fall in love with it. It's very, very all-encompassing. And actually, speaking of all-encompassing, I'm drinking one of the Ghosts of Weimar Past line of tea. That's in development with Alchemy of Avalon right now. So I'm drinking Orchestra of the Depraved right now. So
I'm glad you're not drinking absinthe. I'm glad we're not there today.
I actually love absinthe. That's one of the very few liqueurs I enjoy.
Well, it's a fascinating time period, and similar to people who love the pre-depression kind of the Roaring '20s. I'm fascinated by the Weimar Republic, and the dress and the costume and the kind of ethos of the time. It's like looking at a society that quickly disappeared. but it has an enduring like legacy with Chicago and with there's some movies that have been set in that time. What is the endurance of that in the public imagination?
So, what captures my imagination, excuse me, frog in my throat, what captures my imagination immediately was the time was the Berlin. There was the the mark was going down and down and down to the point that a million marks was was the equivalent of $1 in the early, I want to say 1922, 1923. As a result of this, people were so desperate. People decided that, well, the previous philosophies of religion, nationalism, conservatism, people thought that that didn't matter anymore. Like, what's the point of doing all that? So it became a very hedonistic society. And because the mark was so low, prostitution and exotic dancing was it was a roaring tourist trade from people from Japan, England, France, the US. In addition to this, the hedonism, there was a plus side to it. There was a lot of acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community of that era, and it was probably one of the most accepting times in history before perhaps the 20 teens, 2020s of the 21st century in the US. So a lot of the songs that I choose on purpose that are historical queer anthems that were, for example, one of the songs was written by a lyricist who was arrested by Gestapo for being gay, and he traded writing this song for his freedom, and he wrote it in 1 day. So I very
Wow.
purposely choose songs that have that sort of legacy of connecting to people uh, who have been tried, who connecting to people or honoring the legacy of people who were stamped down and erased, because there was, of course, with the Nazi Party, there was a lot of destruction of culture and records. So I think that it's so important nowadays, especially if you're a performer, especially if you're a queer performer, to know that you have that kind of legacy. You have those ghosts behind you cheering you on.
That's very fascinating, and it's, and now that we enter Pride Month, I think it's great that we were telling stories of people who were erased. I think it's very powerful and compelling.
Mhm.
Sometimes we forget that the Nazis, of course, they exterminated the millions, 6 million Jews, but they also exterminated whatever they could that they didn't like, which was, the Romani, the gay, lesbian, just everything they didn't like was just exterminated. It's so shocking, and it's important we keep those stories alive.
Absolutely. I believe that by honoring the memory of people, that's how they stay alive. That's how they stay with us.
We had
Uh,
a very good friend of mine, Luna Kaufman, she came on one of my first podcasts. She's a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor. She survived the Death March. She lived in 3 different concentration camps, and she says every day I'm alive is a victory over the Nazis. Like that, it's just all about victory and just celebrating, and remembering those who were lost.
that's beautiful.
Very powerful. So tell us about the music, the specific music. So you've obviously carefully researched this time period, both the literature and the music, and how do you put together your programs?
Yes. I will admit there's a lot of there's a lot of meditation involved. There's a lot of contemplation, and there's a lot of consultation of tarot involved. I do dream work to work on this show, and in this way, I was even able to compose songs in the Weimar cabaret style. So if you come on the 17th, it's a mixture of historical songs as well as songs by myself.
Interesting.
Yes, the songs that I've chosen, again, like I said, they're different every time. But I want to say that for every 10, 12 songs that I discover, maybe one or two make it into the show. It really depends on the situation. The way that it's performed, it's it's very character driven in that the show, it's not just a concert. Oh, here's here's my violinist, Tiffany Weiss, who went to Juilliard and is here tonight with us. She becomes Johanna Ball, a fellow Berlinerin who had a secret affair with the main singer of the orchestra of the Depraved. So it's also fully costumed by me. I find a lot of antique clothing. I do a lot of antique sewing patterns. This thing that I made myself is one of the accessories I use in it. And the songs and monologues are, I try to make it so that every character has a moment to shine, so that people in the audience, if I can make one person in the audience who is prejudiced against LGBTQ people, or women, sexist people, if I can get one person in the audience who felt like that before to have sympathy through the songs, expressions, and monologues of the characters in the show, then I've succeeded.
Amen. That's the artists are like a mirror on society, and we can really make change and to show people, and to bring to life people and characters that they can illuminate. I love that. So, when did you first start this concept, and what year was that?
That was 2019, right before the pandemic. So I performed it.
Pre-COVID.
Yes, pre-COVID.
I always say BC, before COVID.
Yeah. So
So shortly.
I performed it at aforementioned steampunk convention, and I performed it at Don't Tell Mama in Midtown. So that was sort of my performing at Don't Tell Mama was sort of my launching off point in my visibility as a professional cabaret performer. Then after that, one of the pianists that I work with, Renee Guerrero, who is also my mother, has nothing to do with it. She's just a very talented pianist.
Cool.
To Australia for the Adelaide Fringe Festival in March 2020. And we were almost stuck there. So I had a solid year to revamp the show, to do research. Instead of myself presenting the show as Artemisia LeFay, I became Carmilla Vep, a debaucherous waste of strings of pearls, to quote one of the songs in the show. I have had a lot of background in playwriting and acting, so it was a lot of fun to create this sort of original character and have the songs have that motivation behind it. After that, I found the show to need other characters to play off of. So I found some musicians who also have acting backgrounds, and depending on who's available, it's a rotating cast of the orchestra of the Depraved.
That's awesome. It keeps it fresh each time too, and very different.
It really does. So we might have some comedy, we might have some mind reading, we might have some weird poetry, might have some dancing, projections of silent films. It's it's a very multimedia show, I'll say.
I like that, the kind of those loose kind of collection, and it gives you a real artistic freedom that you can change the show, add things, subtract things. You're seeing that more and more with indie artists. There'll be we've have feature a lot of indie artists on the show who may have a band but also do acoustic nights or two. They people are very flexible these days because musicians have to be.
Yes, very true. And another part of it is there's a big difference between European and American cabaret, especially back then. American cabaret is very driven by the individual performer as a person. So they would choose a bunch of things from the Great American Songbook, decide on a theme, and then what you're supposed to do is the audience should feel like they're your best friends and they know your whole story by the end of the show. Which is how Ghosts of Weimar Past sort of started out. I tried to make it educational. I talked about it in a very TED Talk sort of way. But European cabaret, or at least what it used to be in the turn of the century, 19 teens, 1920s, it was more akin to American vaudeville. So you might have the singers, but you would also have the monologuists, the jugglers, the comedians, the person with the talking dogs, the burlesque dancer. And there would be composers who wrote music specifically for these. So I have a couple of those from shows such as Schall und Rauch, Es liegt in der Luft. These sort of reviews from the era. So yeah, that's one of my main inspirations, but it's definitely an ongoing process. I don't know if I'll ever be satisfied with the show. I don't know if there will ever be a finished product, but I think that's how it should be. It's more about the journey than the final result.
I'm 47 and I'm still learning every day, and that's the way it should. And it's always exciting every day. I'm a conductor, so I get to do different projects. I was working on last weekend. I worked on 5 projects that same weekend, in addition to the ones we were doing there. It's just that's what makes life interesting. Is you're constantly evolving and learning, and you've given yourself a platform that's really interesting. What's now when you bring the different musicians in? Do you work on to create a character with them, or do they bring a character to you? How does that work?
It's a bit of both, depending on how new they are to acting. So, for example, my brother Quentin and the performer Sam Bash, that is going to be in the next show, they're both very trained actors. So, there's very little that I have to do on their part except perhaps discuss what they're inspired by, what their character's motivation would be. Why would they choose this song to sing? How would they interact with the other characters? For the others, it's been more of a from scratch sort of thing. I've provided guided meditations in the past. I've provided literary research. They could do Duolingo, German for extra credit, just ways to immerse themselves as much as possible and see what character comes up. So we've had this sort of jazz tomboy character as the pianist, a jazz tomboy character, and also a Russian Jewish anarchist playing the pianist. We've had this fiery, sexy diva as the violinist. This sort of French German can character as the accordionist. So it's a very interesting. I'm inspired by commedia dell'arte in the way that there are sort of these archetypes. When you focus on them, the more that you focus on them and commit to them, the more fireworks there will be in between characters. So there's been a lot. There's scripted stuff, but there's a lot of ad-libbing and improv that the audience loves.
How long does it take when you put together a new team and you put it together and then bring it to the stage? What's a typical turnaround for something like that?
So for a brand new team, it's usually 3 rehearsals. If it's people that have been in the show before, we usually just need one rehearsal, one refresher rehearsal to implement any sort of new repertoire.
A tune-up and just back on the stage. But when you bring someone new in, it changes all the dynamics, right? It's like a string
Yeah,
quartet. Everyone brings their own kind of special something to the magic.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
And when's your next performance? What do you have coming up?
17th at, let me look at this. June 17th at 7 p.m. at Pangea. And in the past, we've performed at Birdland, Don't Tell Mom, and the Triads. So we're going to have a little bit of a hiatus this summer and return in the late fall for Ghosts of Weimar Past. And who knows what changes it will have then. It may have it may have magic tricks and contortion and whatnot. I like to utilize people's talents on stage. Like if they're, for example, if they're a jazz pianist, then I want to let them have the chance to do a jazz solo. If they're, for example, if they're a comedian, then I would collaborate with them on bits and sketches to inject into the show.
It's great to have that kind of variety, and the audience loves it too. We all it becomes a real show, not just a concert. It's actually an integrated dramatic purpose. I love that.
Yes, and as much audience participation as possible, I try to do. I'm
Fun.
inspired by um experimental theater. Sleep No More is one of mine. Have you ever been to that?
Never. No.
Ooh, definitely go. That's a real haunted hotel from the 1930s.
Huh.
Um,
I know one of our mutual friends was on. It was in your show before. Alexia Del Giudice. She's been on this show as well, and I know she's worked at the haunted houses for years because her mother always shows me the pictures, and we like laugh so hard. We're usually at a restaurant or something like that, and we're like, check this out, and I'm like howling.
yeah,
It's amazing how theater kind of how interesting you can take these theatrical concepts and here's something you've studied and you're creating and bringing to life. What plans do you have for next year as you grow this concept? And what are some of the thoughts you have? So including different types of performers, this vaudeville kind of idea. I love that, and I imagine the audiences must really react to that.
hmm So when I performed this last year, for exactly last year, June 5th was the first performance of Ghosts of Weimar since the pandemic. Since that, the show has changed so much in so many ways I couldn't even have fathomed. We had our debut at Birdland. We added characters
That must
to
have been
it.
great. I mean, you're performing in such interesting and acclaimed locations, like really important cabaret locations.
I definitely feel like someone up there is looking out for the show. Um, to answer your question, I don't know where the show is going. It's like it is taking me by the hand rather than me giving it direction. I just do whatever it needs. I do whatever I'm guided to do, whatever I'm inspired to do.
Beautiful.
It's yeah, thank you. I'm a big believer in, rather than the art serving the artist should be a servant of the art.
Absolutely, and it's a challenge. Coming out of COVID, we've had a lot of artists on the show, and we talk about the overcoming challenges. So during COVID, there was very little live performance. Did you do any of? Have you done any of these online? Have you done any online performances and pre-recorded performances?
Performance, as a performer yourself, you know the feeling of how devastating it is being away from live performance and being away from the stage. That was my dearest wish throughout those 1.5 years or however long it was, just to be on stage. So really, what I focused more on was how to change the concept. I did have some coachings through Zoom. There's a wonderful performer from Berlin by the name of Le Pustre, who is the artistic director and performer of the Cabaret de Namenlosen, which does something similar in that it resurrects the same cabaret of this historical cabaret by the same name from Weimar, Germany. And he's helped me a lot with how to stage things, how to work with lighting and vignettes for the mood, how to perform a certain song in a more historical or engaging way. So that was that was my focus during the pandemic, just studying and doing as much as I could.
That's that reading and studying. There's no substitute for that. Whether no matter the repertoire or the choices, it never ends. They're always kind of like for me, it's always researching the next show, programming. It's a big part of what I do right now. I'm in the programming process for all my groups next year, and that's my favorite. Literally, my favorite time is programming. I sit with scores everywhere, like it's like just a sea of scores, and I'm mixing and matching and putting together lots of different programs, and it's exciting. It's like that the act of discovery and is such an exciting and fulfilling thing to do.
It really is. And yeah, there's no substitute for research, but there's also no substitute for what you learn and absorb while you're performing live. It's always, like you said, you never stop learning, you never stop growing. I think there was a quote by the musician Yehudi
Menuhin,
Menuhin,
sure.
Menuhin, and he was asked when he was, of course, very, very old, if he, I don't remember what it was exactly, if he felt like he mastered the instrument, and he said, I think I'm making some improvement. So I think it's really important to have that sort of humility as a musician or a performing artist.
Very
It's really
important.
it.
So what's it like that you said you perform with your mother? Now, my son performs with me a lot. He's a video person. He produces this podcast with me. We work together all the time these days. What's it like to work with your parent?
Well, my mother and I get along pretty well because she is not a stage mother. She has only ever stepped in when I've asked for help, and she's a really fantastic musician, and she's had to manage my father, so she has a lot of experience with the business side. So working with her has actually been very invaluable in learning how to manage it, because I do the boring stuff of the show as well. I manage, I do all the logistics, I produce. It's sometimes it's exhausting and overwhelming, but performing it makes it worth it. So
You only know how rewarding it is when you're doing the bills, you're signing the contracts. I do a lot of that too, and it's but that's the behind the scenes that make it all possible, right? And there's a joy, there's a learning process in that too, and that becomes I enjoy that process as well.
yeah, especially when you have people that are pleasant to work with.
There's also the other side of it as well. I spent 2 hours working with Actors Equity today. That was fun, but you it's just you learn to deal with these problems, and my job is to iron things out and to get the shows on the stage.
You do a lot. You
You
conduct,
keep busy.
master. It's very
Well,
admirable.
I really enjoy collaborating with people, and that's really what a conductor is. And some productions, I also book orchestras, and I also book singers, and I do a lot of that as well. And I just really love the artists I work with, and I look for people that are interesting. And I get to pick who I work with most of the time. So it's really a fun thing when I come in a project like we just did, where I don't have to do all that, and I can just kind of do one thing. It's like, this is great.
Yeah. Being the chorus master for Giulietta Romeo, that was a really wonderful collaboration.
A lot of great young singers, great voices in there. It's fun to work with new people too, and I always find I meet so many good people when I work on these projects, and with colleagues like Stephanos, who's a friend, and we've worked together. He's a wonderful bass baritone. We sang together on tour, and a great artist, and just a good friend. And it's just wonderful to see people succeed.
He's wonderful. He's actually I've known him since I was a little kid, actually. Um, I was I remember my first singing teacher when I was 13 years old. She wrote a prologue to La Serva Padrona. This was a long time ago, and she hired me as the young Serpina, and Stephanos was, the padron. Um, oh, I forget his name, Umberto.
Yeah, Umberto. I was gonna say Vespone, but he's the mute actor.
Yes. Yeah. So that was the first time I met Stephanos, and my first experience being in well, my first experience singing in an opera.
It's
But
amazing how
yeah,
in the operatic world people come back and back and back, and I love that. I just love that. The more you're into it, the more that you realize how everybody knows each other. We're either one or two friends removed on social media from almost anybody.
hmm it really is. I think it was Joan Sutherland who said, um, being an being an opera singer is like being part of a crazy family, but we're nice, crazy people.
Most of the time, I find that to be absolutely wonderful, and so many great colleagues. Joan Sutherland was amazing. She used to sit there and knit, and then it was time to go on the stage, and she would get up there and like slay, and then go back to knitting when she was done. I love
I
that.
would think a way to stave off stage jitters. Um, yeah.
Now you also have a background in dance as well. Tell us about that.
I do, yes. I've studied Oriental dance, aka belly dancing, for I want to say the past 7 years. I've studied very briefly in Egypt, where a lot of the the modern Oriental style comes from, but of course there's American cabaret style, Turkish style, folkloric styles.
What was it like to
So,
study in Egypt? It must have been
oh,
incredible.
absolutely wonderful. I made so many friends, and um, just being in the culture, being exposed to the it's called shabby music. Shabby means like of the people. It's like pop music. Just seeing how people naturally danced to music, and getting to see live orchestras, and seeing amazing dancers, and learning from amazing teachers, and that was very instrumental in my dance training. And Egypt is one of my favorite countries, so
Somewhere I'm a huge history fanatic. I'm dying to go to Egypt sometime.
uh, I highly recommend it. And if you need a reputable touring company, I know some people.
Send them my way because it's definitely on my bucket list. I have a few friends who teach there, and somewhere I'm going to make it to eventually.
Mm.
Now, what was it like getting into belly dancing? That's such an interesting art form, and I see it out more and more. It's become more and more attractive to Western people. It's fascinating. What drew you towards that?
um, I had a friend who invited me to a hafla, and there was a live band. There were percussionists and a kanunist and an oudist, and everyone was dancing, and I was just so stricken. Oh my gosh, it's almost my 10-year bellyversary. This was 9 years ago. This was 9 years ago, and I was just so stricken by the soul, the feeling of the dance, that I started taking classes almost immediately. And then eventually I started getting booked at restaurants. And of course this has been hard during the pandemic. I wasn't able to perform at all, but I on the 18th, the same day as the Mermaid Parade, I have an unspecified gig for the first time in a good few months. So I'm looking forward to that. But I feel like even with opera and belly dancing, there's a bit of intersection there. You have the dance of the seven veils in Salome. You have the Samira, Turkish entertainer in Ghosts of Versailles. So those two roles are some dream roles of mine that I hope to combine my different trainings with.
Very cool. And so you do so many different theater to singing to dancing. Where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
Yes, so I have a website under construction, which is where you can find the tea and our soon to come out CD for Ghosts of Weimar Past. It's just artemisialefay.com, artemisialefay.com. Stay on the lookout for that. That's going to come out this summer. And you can find me on my social media, Ghosts of Weimar Past on Instagram or Artemisia LeFay on Instagram. I am Artemisia LeFay official on Facebook. That's my Facebook page. Will people who are listening in be able to find links if I send them to you?
It's already in your description of the video.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yes, find me, follow me, stay on the lookout for future performances and fun creative projects.
I have a feeling that you have a lot on tap because you seem like a very creative person. Just meeting you briefly and working with you, I'm like, this is someone who's really got something to say. And I think that some really exciting performances and concepts are going to come out in the next couple of years.
For sure. I don't know what they are yet, but they're there.
We'll keep channeling that energy and focusing it, and we're all going to be better for it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to keeping in touch, and I can't wait to see what the next chapter holds for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me be here. It was so much fun to talk with you about this subject that I'm very passionate about, and I hope that the people who are listening in and enjoyed hearing about this very strange niche of performance as much as I enjoy talking about it.
Let's give one more question before you go. What can
Yes.
Weimar and the Weimar time period teach us today?
So there's a great Bertolt Brecht quote that translates loosely to, "In the dark times, will there still be singing?" And then he answers himself by saying, "Yes, there will be singing about the dark times." So I think that the sort of tongue-in-cheek dark humor is a way of dealing with these things that are almost parallel. There's neo-fascism, neo-Nazism, and anti-Semitism, and hate crimes to LGBTQ plus people in this country. We went through a pandemic, which is very parallel to the Spanish flu that happened back then. So I think that by studying the past, when you, to quote a tagline that I put in the description of my show, when you study the past, it prevents the horrors of history from happening again. And what are the ghosts of Weimar past warning us of? So I think it's all that, how to deal with dark times and how to prevent them from happening.
Well, thank you so much. And make sure you check out this artist who's on the rise and doing some really fascinating work. And thank you for being on Music Matters today.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters. Please remember to subscribe and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. And we have a wonderful roster of guests coming up in the months to come. So be sure to check out our website at www.jasontram.net. And remember, keep music alive.